Hey everyone, welcome back to another video with Ricky the RBT turned BCBA. My name is Ricky Hawks Jr., conqueror of both the RBT and BCBA exams, and today I want to give you 7 tips on how to pass the RBT exam. Let's jump into it. So I started off similar to how a lot of people who reach out to me are starting, where they don't have a lot of guidance after the 40-hour course. You're aware that you should be doing an initial competency assessment, but you may not have a qualified assessor ready to assess you for the competency assessment, or you may not be ready for the competency assessment, or you may not know that that's the next step. So if you don't know, then that is the next step. It's for you to do an initial competency assessment with a qualified assessor. What is a qualified assessor? Please check out the BACB's website for all the definitions that they have. You can kind of go to their website and they'll have a section for the RBTs. You can look into the RBT handbook and they'll have everything specified there. So after the 40-hour course, I reached out to a clinic to conduct my initial competency assessment, and they were willing to do it. And so I went in, I did the initial competency assessment, I passed, and after that, that's where you're going to gather all of your documentation, and you're going to send it to the board is going to review it, and they'll let you know whether or not you're approved to sit for the RBT exam. And so I sent my things off. I was approved to sit for the RBT exam, and then I began studying. So how I went about studying for the RBT exam looked kind of similar to how I studied for the BCBA exam. It's just not as many details, because for the BCBA exam, I did a lot of research and I reached out to a lot of different people to kind of figure out what worked for them, what didn't work, what materials were useful, what materials weren't. For the RBT exam, I was kind of figuring it out as I went, because I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know anyone that was in RBT. I didn't know who to reach out to. So as I was studying for the RBT exam, I was kind of figuring it out as I went. And so that's how I was able to develop these 7 tips to give to you, because I feel like they will be super useful for you to utilize as you're studying or as you're preparing to study for the RBT exam. Tip number 1, find your baseline. So I know if you've watched my 5 tips for the BCBA exam video, I mentioned this as well. So the same for the RBT exam. Find your baseline. Find a mock exam. You can find a mock exam on aba.rocks. I'll put it somewhere here on the screen. Then I'll also put it in the description box below. But aba.rocks. It sounds kind of weird, but that's just the way the website is written. So aba.rocks, I believe they have 2 full mock exams on their website, and then they have what I would call mini mock exams, where they have smaller mock exams for each section of the RBT task list, which is the task list that you will use to study for the RBT exam. Another place that I would look for mock exams is either you can Google search them, and maybe they have some that you can pay for, or you can look on Facebook and you can join the ABA study group or RBT specific study group and see in their file section if they have any RBT exams readily available. When you take that mock exam, at the end you should be receiving a score, and hopefully they have a score breakdown so you can see which sections you need the most assistance with and which sections you're the most strongest in. And so based on that score breakdown, you look at each section, and the section that you receive the lowest percentage in, that should be ranked number 1. That should be the number 1 section that you focus on, because that's your weakest area. And based on all those percentages up under that score breakdown, you can kind of number them to kind of create a hierarchy, where number 1 is your weakest section, the area that you're focusing the most attention on, and whatever the last number is your strongest section. That's the section where you're still going to focus time, but you don't have to focus as much time because that's your strongest area. Tip number 2, create a study schedule. Create a realistic study schedule. And why I emphasize realistic is because sometimes we could go in, we're about to start studying for this exam. We're super excited. We're super anxious. So many emotions. And, we tell ourselves, I'm going to study for 7 days, 3 or 4 hours a day. And that's going to be, what I'm going to do every single week all the way up until my test date. And sometimes that may not be realistic. We still have our entire lives to live. We still have friends to kind of hang out with. We have kids. We have jobs. We have so many other things. We have spouses. And so us telling ourselves that we're going to study for 7 days, 3 or 4 hours a day, it may not be realistic. And so we find ourselves overwhelmed, super stressed out because this study schedule that we created, we want to stick to it and we don't want to derail from it, but it's just not realistic, right? So make sure that you're kind of considering what your day looks like, right? How long are you working, right? What do you typically do when you get home? What do you typically do when you get up? What does your workday look like? Are there gaps in there? Do you have a break? Uh, what days can you truly take advantage of studying, and for how many hours can you realistically sit down and study? And so for me, I was studying every single day, but with me working at a school, I was getting out of school. The school day was ending at like 3, and so we cleaned up and we were done with the school day at like at latest 4. And so I had from 4 on up until midnight if I really wanted to study. And so I was able to study every single day because I had so much time allowed. But when I became an RBT, where I was kind of working from 9 to 6 p.m., it's filled up with sessions with clients. It was hard for me to squeeze in, studying. Even for the BCBA exam, I was using like Quizlet and the ABA Wizard app. So it was a lot easier. I had something on the go, but pulling out a book is just not realistic. Schedule when I was studying for the RBT exam, I was basing it on what my work day looked like and what before work looked like and what after work looked like. And so I set a time, I scheduled a time, and I studied at that same time every single day, and I studied for the same amount of days each week. Do I remember what those days and times are? I do not. But I can definitely probably find something on my computer because I'm pretty sure I saved the document or something like that. So yeah, set a realistic timeline. A realistic schedule. Speaking of timelines, let's create a timeline, right? So you can determine whether or not you're the type of person that will work better if you schedule the exam well in advance or you schedule the exam when you're ready, right? So like I can't tell you whether or not that's a good idea for you or not. You'll know better than I will on whether or not it'll be better for you to schedule the exam in advance or schedule it when you're ready. Only reason I'm mentioning that is so you can create a timeline. And so if you don't schedule the exam in advance, then it's kind of very open-ended on how long you're going to study. There's no specific timetable on how long to study, but you still want to know, you don't want to study for too long to where you've been studying for an entire year, right? Try to at least give yourself like a tentative date, right? You may not go in and register for that actual date, but give yourself like a tentative date to really maybe like take a mock exam on that date, just so you have a timeline and it's just not open-ended. So create that timeline, see how long you actually want to spend, on each section, see how long you want to spend studying in all the way up until that next mock exam that you take or the actual exam that you will take. Tip number 2 is, I mentioned picking certain days to study, but also pick certain days to take a break. Give your brain a break and let that knowledge that you've acquired really settle into those neural pathways. Studying every single day, it can be daunting, it can be stressful, and that can be harmful in the long run. So give yourself a day or two, give yourself the weekends. Personally, for the BCBA exam, I gave myself the weekends. So I was studying Monday through Friday. And again, if you guys watch my video, I was kind of studying from sun up to sundown. And so, but Monday through Friday, I was studying. And then the weekends, I pushed all the books to the side and I enjoyed the weekend as much as I could, right? But I really wanted to just rest and just be able to play my video games, be able to go out with friends, be able to go out with family and not feel this pressure of having to continue to study every single day. So that is an additional tip to tip number 2 is give yourself those days where you can take a break. Tip number 3, do not forget to refer back to your 40-hour training course. You spent 40 hours sitting in front of your computer, watching videos, watching these PowerPoints, listening to people talk. And so now that you're preparing to study for the exam, if you need to refresh on anything, you should be able to go back, to your 40-hour training course and utilize that 40-hour training course as a resource. That is your most readily and available resource before you go to reaching out to other people or you go to paying for different things. You still have that resource. You should still be able to access your 40-hour training course. So do not forget, if you need a refresher on anything as you're going through a studying process, you can go back to your 40-hour training course. Tip number 4, utilizing the BACB's task list, the RBT task list, second edition. Everything listed on the task list is everything that you're going to be tested on. So go refer back to that task list, really pay attention to the language that they're using. I know when I look at it, a lot of the language that they use is implement, right? And so looking at the language that they're using, when you are studying shaping or chaining or differential reinforcement or continuous measurement, so on and so forth, make sure you pay attention to the language that they're using and when they're kind of explaining how they kind of want you to explain that information, right? And so, for instance, I know specifically for chaining, they say implementing task analyzed chaining procedures. And so you should be able to explain it that way, right? So it's one thing to explain forward chaining to me, but not tell me how to implement it and not be able to visualize what implementing it looks like, right? So that is super important to pay attention to the language that they're using on the task list, right? And so as you're studying and you're able to define what chaining is, you're able to define what discrimination training is, also be able to explain what it looks like, when you would use it, where you would use it, how it looks when you use it, what does it look like when you implement it, right? And so if you need to, create a fake client, right? Give them fake skill deficits and now discuss to yourself what it'll look like to enhance their skills by shaping their communication skills to have them to start manding, right? That's the significance of creating that fake client. It's just so now we go through the mental process of talking ourselves through how to implement shaping. So just like do not negate the 40-hour training course that you took, do not negate the BACB's task list. Look over it, pull it up, just look at the language that they're using and be able to explain it based on how they want you to understand it. Tip number 5, utilizing Quizlet or physical flashcards, whatever you prefer. Again, I prefer digital, so I lean more towards Quizlet, but I still utilize physical flashcards as well. And so whatever works for you, but having those flashcards so you can go through them on the go and you can continue to build fluency throughout the day, continue to build fluency throughout your study session. So when you're seeing these terms, you're able to define them, a lot quicker because you remember it's a time test. And so utilizing Quizlet or utilizing physical flashcards. And so how you would create them is based on whatever the task list item is. There's typically terms that fall up under it. On the task list, right? The first one is continuous measurement. And so you can have a flashcard for continuous measurement, but also have a flashcard for frequency, have a flashcard for rate, have a flashcard for duration, have a flashcard for latency, inter response time. Same for discontinuous measurement. Don't just have a flashcard for discontinuous measurement and try to specify everything on that one flashcard. Really, break down all the other things that fall up under discontinuous measurement. Same for chaining. All the things that fall up under chaining, have a separate flashcard for those. And so as you're going through your flashcards, you're able to kind of cover everything that you should know for the RBT exam. So as time goes on, you guys will kind of continue to hear me mention flashcards because it's just something that you can utilize on the go. They're easy to store, easy if you use them on your phone, you can just pull it up. You just pull up the Quizlet app or whatever app you use, and you can just kind of run through flashcards and continue to build fluency, continue to decrease the amount of time it takes for you to define a term when you see it. And that's the significance of utilizing flashcards. And so on the test, you're not spending a lot of time trying to figure out what this term means, right? You can spend more time comparing it to another term and kind of using your knowledge of defining it to determine how it applies to the question and how it's maybe a better answer choice than the other answer choice. But we don't want to spend a lot of time just sitting here trying to remember what this actually means. Because tip number 6, mock questions, answering mock questions. So personally, I utilize the website aba.rocks, and what I would do is, I believe at that time they had 2 full mock exams, and then they had mini mock exams where they were mock exams for each particular section. And so what I would do is, after I studied a section, I would then go answer questions based on whatever section I just learned about or whatever section I just studied. So if I focused on section A all week, then on Friday is when I'll take that mini mock exam, and it'll maybe be like 10 or 15 questions, but I've studied this section all week, and now I'm ready to apply that knowledge to the questions that are on aba.rocks. And so if I don't do well, then that kind of tells me like, okay, review the questions that I got wrong and revisit them the following week, right? Not revisit the question, but revisit the terms or the concepts that I was stumped on. And so that's what I would do, is I would study for that entire week, and at the end of the week, I would go apply my knowledge to the mock exam questions on aba.rocks. Another resource is the ABA Wizard app BT exam. So I personally have never used it, but I've heard really great reviews about it. And so this is just another resource for you to utilize to answer questions. You want to be able to apply the knowledge that you're acquiring throughout your study sessions, right? So don't just continue to just study and be able to define and be able to explain without being able to apply that knowledge to a question, right? So, and don't let the RBT exam be your first time that you see questions, that kind of refer to whatever you've been learning about. So utilize the aba.rocks website, go to Facebook, join those study groups, see if people are asking questions, see if people have like different resources, see if there's mock exams on there, or you can pay for the ABA Wizard app, and that is another resource for you to utilize so you can answer questions. It is imperative that you answer questions. An additional tip to tip number 6 is testing yourself using the task list. And so you can pull up the task list and you just maybe run your finger across the paper, run your finger across the screen, and wherever your finger lands on, that's the one that you explain. Based on how they want you to understand it, that's the one that you explain. And so you can kind of just test yourself by randomizing which task list item that you talk about, or you can ask someone else to look at the task list and just choose something. I would look for someone that knows, because when you explain it, they'll be able to give you feedback, but have someone else choose items off the task list, throw them to you, and you just explain it. All right, so that's another thing that you can do to kind of help with explaining the things that you're learning about, is you can have someone test you on them. So you test yourself by answering questions, and you test yourself by randomly kind of just explaining the different things from the task list. Tip number 7, utilizing YouTube. So when I was studying for the RBT exam, I did not use Sitecore. I mentioned Sitecore in my BCBA exam tips video for the RBT exam. I visited a channel called Autism Live, and the host, she would do a series called Autism Jargon. Now remember, I did not have any prior knowledge. I had small knowledge on what ABA was, but the specifics for the RBT task list, I didn't know any of that stuff. And so I visited her channel all the time to watch her videos, and she did such an amazing job explaining and breaking down what the different task list items were. She didn't specify them as RBT task list items. It was just called like Autism Jargon, and she'll talk about discrete trial teaching. And so that's how I was able to really learn more about what I should know, as far as applying these different task list items to my job, or how I should be studying them, how I should be understanding them, so on and so forth. And so that was the YouTube channel that I was using when I was studying for the RBT exam. But now on YouTube, there's so many different resources. There's so many different people, providing such amazing content So definitely utilize YouTube. And now you have my channel here on YouTube as well. I'll be breaking down the task list right along with everyone else. So I hope the videos that I create are extremely helpful for you, right? And so I want you to subscribe. I want you to hit that notification bell so you're notified for when I start uploading those videos where I'm breaking down the RBT task list. So those are my 7 tips to pass the RBT exam. I hope you found this video helpful. If you wrote anything down, please leave me a thumbs up. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. For all my people that have passed, for all my people that are studying, please comment below some of your study tips. Until next time, I'll catch you guys in my next video. I'm out. Peace.